Welcome to the Wenner Folsom podcast. We got a great episode for you today. Today we're joined by Jack Donovan, aka Start the World. And for those of you that don't know, he's a prolific author in men's work. He has multiple books. He's been on multiple podcasts, and he's one of the most creative, expressive men that is also very masculine. And so we dive into some really interesting topics around how do men claim their creativity and healthy expression. We dive into concepts around the power of creating strength and creating order out of chaos. And this is just an episode you don't want to miss, so tap in.
Jack Donovan. Hey, what I was sharing is that I've never done a podcast wearing a tank top, because a lot of the time, this is not one of these things that you would put in a public forum. I mean, unless you're rolling around or you're at the gym or something, but not on a formally public place like this. And part of the reason why I'm doing that was because you are so modeling a healthy masculine expression and creativity with your brand that it's really empowering. And from people who have studied a lot of mythology and culture, the male of any species is always going to be the most expressive. They're the ones with the racks and the manes and the paints and the feathers. Like, that's what we do. And that has been removed culturally and fairly recently from our species. And when I read your work and I see your feed, and you're making altars and you're making photography and you're unapologetically expressing yourself. And that form of creativity is really inspiring and very needed in today's masculine conversation.
Thanks. And it is something that's happened fairly recently in culture, because if you look back at history, men have actually made, we wrote the poems and sung the songs and, built the buildings and the cathedrals and the Parthenon and all that. We did all that. And, we've been responsible for so much of the creation, the great paintings that you imagine, the sculptures and so forth. Men have been creators for all of human history. And I think that's important to remember. And I think that we've gotten away from that a little bit in America. And I hear a lot of complaints from men that our culture is becoming more feminized. And that's certainly true. And there's a more feminine influence on culture. But art is going to come from the people who are making it. And if men don't make art, then people who are not men are going to make art, and people who don't value masculinity are going to make art. So if masculine men aren't making art, we won't have masculine art, like authentically masculine art. And that's, I think, something that men have gone away from that. And I wrote an essay about that recently. There's this, I actually got it from anthropology. There's this concept called sex pollution. And it basically relates to the idea of, maybe like a menstrual hut. If you've heard of that in like primitive cultures where the women were impure during a certain time and they had to go there so that they didn't pollute the men with like, their feminine spirits or whatever. And there's been a bunch of that in a lot of different cultures. And I took that kind of idea from that and I looked at it as we look at it our culture, mainstream culture now. And as women get more involved in society, men cede territory. Like, because men, obviously, it's like I said, men made all the art up until like very recently. And now, as women start making art, men are like, oh, well, women and effeminate men are doing that, so men don't want to do it anymore. And the same thing happens with so many things. You can look at internet trends. Like if a bunch of girls start doing it, if it becomes like a girl thing, then men won't do it anymore. It doesn't matter if it's gendered or not. We just kind of like, that's tainted, so men won't do it. Masculine men won't do that. And unfortunately, that is our natural response to that, because we want to keep a division between the sexes. But the downside of that is that, well, women are everywhere and they do everything now. So that's why we kind of have this stupid man cave culture, this man cave culture of like, dudes can only care about beards and whiskey and like 5 things, then those are the things that women didn't want, basically. So that's our secret. That's our like special identity. And unfortunately, we used to care about everything. And so I think it's really important for men to rediscover that creativity and put their own masculine mark on the world.
Brilliant. There's always been cycles where there's great men that have, whether it be in Athens or founding fathers of America or the Enlightenment, and they're all holistically successful men who can fight and run a farm and speak languages, but they also can write poetry universally. They were all, they almost all of them were poets. And so it's a great observation. We see,
I mean, like Plato was a wrestler, right? I mean, that's famously, and George Washington had his favorite plays. He loved to dance. There's this bigger perspective of what masculinity is, and I think the ruling classes in Europe, there's a little bit more of a tradition there, because you had this men who were trained to go into the military and become warrior kings. Basically, if you look at like colonial, like Britain, like that's where we get like, Rudyard Kipling and If and all that stuff. It's like men who were warriors and wrote poetry and all these things that
Hemingway.
Yeah. And then, like in America, I think we lost a little bit of that. You're just either one or the other. And I think we need to reconnect those things.
Hey, so I got a question for you for, let's say, the guy that struggles with claiming his expression and, struggles with finding like, what is my expression and how do I find my creative way to express that? I'm curious your mindset, because you model it really well of, like Philip mentioned, unapologetically, like, hey, I'm going to feel who I am. I'm going to express it unapologetically. When you are breaking that down, your mindset, your interpretation, what's your internal interpretation when you're looking at that? Is that the artist side of, hey, this is how I'm expressing myself in my own art or expression, or what's the internalized story you tell yourself to express that because you do it so powerfully? Just curious.
Well, I think a lot of people who say they make art make it because they can't not make art. So there's a little bit of that. I would be bored if I wasn't creating things. And that's when I get most excited in life, is when I'm creating things. I've been messing with artificial intelligence recently and the art that you can make with that. And that's like crack to me, because it comes back in like 1 minute, you get like 4 options and you keep going. And it's like you're putting money in the machine and I'm like, change the prompt, move this thing over here. That's so exciting, because I'm getting images coming right, out of my mind, interpreted through a computer, and they're coming right back to me really fast. And that's exciting. So that's part of me, but I think all men have some kind of thing that they want to see realized. Something that they think is beautiful. And they think they have to maybe give themselves permission to access that side of themselves. And I think the confusion comes in when they think that they have to do things the way that women do it. Where it becomes a communication or art or anything else, like, well, that doesn't mean you need to go and do craft night with the girls. Expressing your creativity does not mean you need to go and, go to a Build-A-Bear or something, that women enjoy. I mean, that's for kids, but, it could be finding the things that so much of it comes to taste, because we're not all going to necessarily make art, and we don't necessarily have to. I mean, a lot of the great art that was created throughout history was created because a guy with money said, I want to see this other guy bring something beautiful into the world. I have an idea. Why don't you're good at that. Here's some money. Go do that. I mean, that's most of the art that's ever been created is on the patron system. Yep. And so, that's one way that I think that men can learn how to go look at art that men are making and find out what you don't like and what you do like, and support that or surround yourself with that. Because a lot of guys think that they always say modern art, but modern art could be a million things. If you actually went to a museum, you might see something that you think is cool that was made in the 20th century. I think a lot of guys got to give they dismiss everything that's been made in the last century or so. If you look at the sculpture of Richard Serra, it's giant things made of steel. It's a whole room size maze or something that's made out of steel. It's like, oh, that's not masculine. It's like there's so much to discover that I think that men haven't given themselves permission to discover that. And if they can really go out and see these things and then be inspired by them. And like I said, support other artists who are doing the things that you like. We always tend to complain about people who are doing the things that we don't like, but the better option always is to go and find the people who are doing the things that you do like and help support them.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant.
Yeah, I really like that. So part of the takeaway, because we're always given actionable tools that men can go do immediately, or anybody really that's listening, is it sounds like challenge your story. You may be living in a story of what you think is masculine or feminine, and it's shutting you off from getting your actual opinion on it. So maybe challenge your story first, reconnect with what actually you like or don't like, and start to go look at art and things that are creative and start to notice what inspires you. That's what I'm hearing is what inspires you. Spend time around art, spend time around creativity. And then from it, that's how you start to move into that expression, letting that inspiration move you to express.
Absolutely. And it's all about context in the storyline. It's like, we don't have to like the same stories that women like or whatever. But I mean, most of the art has been made obviously about myths. A lot of the myths are about heroes. The myths are about heroes, and you know, the art's been made about warriors and all that kind of stuff. And there's so much material out there. Like, and you know, there's certain people that want to separate childhood and adulthood. It's like, you know, I found this graphic novel, and I always talk about it because it just blows me away, because I'm like, this is what it could be. There was a graphic novel put out a few years ago about Hercules, but it was set in the future. So it was a retelling of the Hercules myth set in outer space. And with all of the gory parts of it, because people don't know, like a lot of people don't know that, you know, Hercules went crazy because Hera made him murder his whole family. And that's actually why he had to do all those labors to atone for that. And with all the drama that's there in myth, but like in outer space, and it's in this graphic novel, and it's fantastic. And, you know, there's so much of that, you know, men don't have to like, well, I need to go do flower arranging. You know, go find the stories that you like and the ideas that you like expressed in art. And yeah, go, like you said, challenge your narrative of what you're allowed to like and what you're not allowed to like, and go, you know, don't let other people pick out things for you. I mean, a lot of it is finding your own taste. You know, go explore like a museum or something like that and be like, well, what do I really like? And don't make it about what other people say is good. What's the thing here that I like?
I've had a little epiphany here listening to you about, as the female colonialism of culture has forced us to cede territory. I think that just reclaiming that territory has demanded almost a hyper masculinity. And I'm just wondering if you can relate, like, you're about the most jacked, warrior-based, bearded, you know, like, you're hyper masculine. And I'm wondering how much, and probably all three of us are, in terms of how we parade around in the world. Are we doing that so that we have permission to express our vulnerability or our creativity or things that have been reclaimed by the feminine world? Did that make sense?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that I'm going to be a word nerd about, because I kind of am, about hypermasculine, because hypermasculine is a control word, because it actually it basically implies too much masculinity, like we're overdoing it, and that means like who am I overdoing it for? Like who's creating the value of what's better? Normal? Huh? What?
Uber, is that better?
Yeah. I mean, I just like to throw that out there because a lot of guys don't think about that. They just hear that word, and I'm like, hey, you know, like that's actually telling me that I'm doing it wrong in a way. So basically, I think, you know, there is that discussion within feminism and all kinds of things about, like, you know, well, men didn't actually lift weights before the 20th century, really. That wasn't a really part of our culture. But, you know, because men were busy like doing hard labor, and they didn't have to like lift weights because they were doing hard labor. And now we have to replicate the hard labor with the gym. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm giving myself permission to, you know, express myself by being that. For me, it's a form of idealism. You know, if you want to go like, well, what is masculinity? Well, to represent that, if I'm going to talk about it, I need to try to like represent it in a particular way. This is why I still have to go to jiu-jitsu and get strangled all the time, because I said that I should, you know, so I have to go and represent that. I guess it's kind of a form of public honor. You know, you want to try and represent this concept that, you know, this platonic form of masculinity that you're interacting with. And, you know, why would I not want to be the best, the closest version of that to be? I'll never be perfect, but why wouldn't I want to make myself as close to my perfect imagination of what I would look like? You know, I mean, I think that's the thing with bodybuilding. It's a kind of form of physical idealism. You know, like, could I look like a Greek god? How close can I get? I mean, I believe, you're preparing for a bodybuilding show soon, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And it's just like, well, how good can I make this machine? You know, like it's exciting.
Yeah, and I'm seeing two parallels. One, I'm relating to both sides of this is because one, I think my initial, well, I'll start back. First, I struggled because I was trying to do it for myself and external validation. I was trying to get something and I struggled. Once I stepped into the idealism of like, if I'm actually going to be in men's work and I'm going to own that, then I actually have to be a man that's congruent with my word, that steps into my power, that claims myself and that vision of what I see myself as, or because I dismiss men. If they're fat and in men's work, I'm like, fuck, I see your message. You're
a fat trainer.
You're a fat trainer.
Sick doctors.
So
charlatans.
I think the combination of that idealism, but second, I do a lot of emotional work, which typically this more biles into the conversation of, I think, the man versus woman. And if we go further back, tribes, it was very natural to grieve together, to process together. But in this shift in our culture, that's been split. And so I think part of that was I do a lot of work with really strong warrior type men, and now moving into really strong women as well. And if I'm holding that container, then there's more trust of like, okay, well, if he can embody this, then I'm willing to listen to what he has to say, to go into another level of looking at that pain or the trauma or the messy parts of life, because I'm proving it through that. So I think there's, Philip, to your point, I was less effective when I wasn't in shape than I am now. Now I have the respect at a different level. So men are willing to say, all right, I can see that you're holding the line and you're matching the idealism. So I'm willing to go where you're willing to go to take me into another area of courage or vulnerability to heal myself, but if I wasn't living it, that would be dismissed. Right. And I actually have guys in the trauma space that I dismiss, and I can't even look at their message because I'm like, you're obviously in your own fucking pain and trauma and you're eating food to numb. So I can't even listen to your message because it doesn't feel congruent. So interesting conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree completely. And I feel the same way. I mean, I'll dismiss somebody. I'm like, hey, you don't have your shit together to do this. If you're not, at least like everybody doesn't have to be a bodybuilder. That's its own kind of craziness and creates its own weird body dysmorphia that I deal with every day. But, everybody, you do have to have this physical presence, I think, and look like you have it's a self-respect thing. I think, that people have to see to really kind of validate you. And as you were saying, if you're going into this realm that's already kind of taboo, this kind of emotional space, that makes perfect sense to me that you would have to, you don't want to go there with some guys, weakness is contagious to men. Like men look at weakness and they're like, I don't want that near me because it might get me sick. And so like, if you were like, I'm crying and I'm skinny and like skinny fat and whatever. And then you're like, they don't want to go to that place with you because that just brings them down, So if you're like, hey, we can talk about this thing, but I'm also like in control of myself and have that kind of gravitas, then that's a good idea.
I also think, and vulnerability is, one of the big keywords that's been thrown around in the men's workspace. And I've always had the just strong conviction that vulnerability is secondary to strength. And if strength is not first, then you just have sensitivity.
Right.
And so I think it's a similar conversation, is that once strength has been established, Hemingway can kind of do what he wants to do at that point because he can punch you in the face. There's a different form of freedom of exploring what you're calling, kind of maybe taboo or feminized topics if you are strong. And maybe that's kind of what I was.
You have man points to spend at that point. You're like
in the bank.
You have this many, and so like you can people will give you enough respect. Like the example I always use of that is my oldest friend. His dad went to Vietnam twice. He went the second time so his brother wouldn't have to go back. His brother wouldn't have to go, and that's valor. So if he wants to work out to ABBA at the gym, that's fine. He has all the man points in the world. That's fine. We would just joke about it because I actually went and worked out with him a few times. What do you listen to, ABBA? So who cares? You went to Vietnam twice, So I think if you have like this slush fund of I've proven myself to a certain extent, you get a little bit more permission from other men. Whereas if you haven't established that, then you get a little bit less.
Hey, we thank you for listening to the Wenner Folsom podcast. Just a couple quick notes. First, if you are a man and you're looking for an honorable and inspiring group of men to hold you accountable and challenge you to grow in your relationships, your fitness, your career, your finances, and your life, go to www.k4men.com. And if you are a veteran, first responder, or man or woman who deals with trauma, and you're looking for some resiliency tools and skills for you, your team, or your organization, go to valorresiliency.com. Hope to see you there. Back to the podcast. I see the full circle tying back into the expression conversation from what we started earlier. I think as you start to build strength and power in your convictions and your resiliency and your integrity, really with your ideals and what you're getting inspiration to step into, listening to that, doing the hard work to get there, I think that's now what gives you permission to now say, oh, I can actualize myself. How do I now want to express myself? Because that's, I think, the journey I'm at currently. Yeah. We use the archetypes in our K4 men's work and in Valor to express it, whereas King would be the expression, warriors very much rigidity and boundaries, lovers where we feel our emotions or have relationships, and then our magician is like the structure, plans, procedures. So this is very much a King conversation, but without the other ones, right? It doesn't all keep intact.
You're insignificant without the others.
Yeah. I mean, you get to be the whole person, obviously.
Yeah, I like that. So I think that's just a takeaway is, hey, if you're wanting to express yourself and it's in an area that may be looked at outside the box, and so you're suppressing that, like go claim some power, go claim some strength, go actualize yourself to a different level. So you have permission to now express yourself in that way, and you'll get strength from men. Because we're all in men's work. It's an interesting thing with men, right? It's an interesting thing with us and, the imposter syndrome that comes up. Who am I to lead men or express men in ourselves? And I think it's also noticing when men feel inspired or resonant versus when they're repelled. It's an interesting in our nature of growing up around shame. And I think that's where the weakness originated. Like you noticed early on as a kid, hey, I show a little bit of weakness. I'm beat up or bullied. So we learn to armor up and weaponize ourselves against men. So it's an interesting conversation of learning how to step into leadership roles or philosophical roles or allies that are really leading this. Because I think there's a collection of us all ushering in healthy masculinity in men to really claim their power and to go step into leadership roles in our society. That's what, at least our frame, and it sounds like we're aligned on that. That's how we change things, is we actually empower men to weaponize themselves, level up, and then actually step into leadership and go create the change. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the hero's journey cycle too, the warrior comes first, right? And so we're in that lover being archetype, and the answer the call phase is always step into warrior, road of trials, gain discipline, explore power and fighting and conflict. And then we get the other archetypes come online with that point. And I think it probably addresses some of the core inadequacy wounds of men, the claiming of warrior first, which then liberates more of expression and creativity. And I was just saying there's probably a psychological sequence there that we're all exploring with our reclamation of masculinity.
Yeah, well, basically what I was going to say is that that's really everything. What I've always written about since the beginning, and now what I wrote about in Fire in the Dark, my most recent book, is that, that's basically that's not just the structure of how men deal with things. That's the structure of like human civilization. You go into a space and you have to take control of it first. You basically have to, you step into a space and you create a perimeter of safety, and you have to go out into chaos and deal with chaos and overcome it to create a perimeter of safety. And within that perimeter of safety, that's where culture happens. And so like, unless you do that first, then you're just like wandering through the wilderness of chaos and being chaotic. Men create order from chaos, and that's kind of fundamentally on a spiritual level what we do. And yeah, you have to address, that's our first role as men, has always been to do that. And I always quote Enter the Dragon, the Bruce Lee movie. There's Han in that movie, the evil character says what delicate wonders and beauties in the world have died except for want of the strength to exist. And without strength, none of those things happen. You don't have art, you don't have beauty, you don't have philosophy, you don't have anything because your society got conquered. you got erased. I mean, because that's happened. So many conquered have been erased. So men are, I think, very tactically aware. It's part of our nature to be tactically aware of that, and that's first. Like, is the house secure? Well, because you can't have all the other stuff going on in the house unless the house is secure. And so I think that it's very natural to our being to address first principles. First.
Well, and there's an interesting parallel. I really love that framing, by the way. That's really, really, really helpful. And I'm getting some new insights, even just from the way you frame that from some of the maps we teach. But you talk a lot about Nietzsche in your book, A More Complete Beast. And it's an interesting line because we're talking a lot about these ways to conquer inadequacies, to manage the chaos, to create structure. But then there's a shadow side to it too. And I think it's an interesting, even Nietzsche goes into talking more about, if you're continually fighting monsters, you got to be careful that you don't become the monster. So there's this interesting line around shadow. And I'm just curious how that shows up, or your reflections on some of that, because, or go ahead, Philip.
Or in Iron John, the wild man conversation becoming the savage man.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's, I think military guys especially deal with that the most. And obviously probably cops, maybe even more, because they deal with more bullshit on a regular basis for a longer period of time. But yeah, where you just become nihilistic, I think is the threshold of that. Like, are you doing this for a reason, or are you just doing it because now you like violence? Like that, or now you just you cross the threshold where that's all you care about. And I feel like with a lot of men, they'll focus on the tactical and then forget about everything else. And I see that because I deal with a lot of the gun community and all that kind of stuff a lot. A lot of my readers in that space in some way, and they'll focus on are you ready? Are you packing heat every day? Are you doing it, like everything that they need to worry about tactically? And they don't have any room for anything else, because that's 90% of what they're concerned about. And it can become a little bit of an obsession because they're probably not in danger most of the time. I mean, it's good to think about those things. It's bad to be careless. But it's good. I do think that they need to find space to make a little bit of balance, or there's this idea that we almost become like, oh, am I just a security guard now? Like I see that in a lot of guys, like our job is to protect. Okay, well, yes, that is part of your job, but you actually have to be a whole person, or you're just a security guard.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually seeing I love this conversation because I'm seeing an actual thread to what we're naturally talking about. Is I see this a lot in myself, because I like moving really fast, and I'm even noticing it now with training, deficit, all the protocols I have in place. It's really fun because I can move quick and I'm getting a lot done. But I also notice the shadow peeking in just a little bit, going, oh wait, I'm in hypervigilance. And if I continue to live in this state, I'm quick, I'm a little shorter. The tone isn't as, there's not a lot of space for being, and so I think the shadow, just as I'm experiencing this as we're talking, is if you're so weaponized, and again, you look at a partner or children or a family unit, there's no space. If you're in battle, if you're in war, if you're weaponized to tactically get things done, you move really quick, you're building strength, you're building rituals, power, there's not a lot of spaciousness. And so if you stay in that state, and I would actually venture to say, as we're talking about this, the expression or the creativity is actually what normalizes that. And it actually balances out that rigidity, because it's a rigidness, but without the rigidity, that's where I think it moves into the shadow deeper, because there's no spaciousness, there's no transmutation. And I think the creativity actually allows you to stay in that state, but then transmute a lot of that into different forms of expression, which is a form of being, essentially, or spaciousness, because you can't create art in hypervigilance, right? You have to be in a more spacious, creative space, which is very different than discipline, focus, mastery. Like, it's a very different space. So potentially somebody that's listening to this, because we do have a lot of veterans and warrior community that are also listening to this. If you notice you're that guy that is like really good at the hypervigilance, weaponizing yourself, constantly building, growing, this creative expression may be something for you to investigate. Where can you, if that feels dead to you currently, where can you open up pockets of creativity and expression through music, dance, writing? There's so many ways to express that, but that's also on the trauma space. That's one of the ways that we purify. we purify ourselves by transmuting and expressing that into something different. It's an alchemized process.
And I guess, Jack, what you're saying about the fire in the dark and creating structure out of chaos, we're building and maintaining the container. Something has to fill the container.
Yes.
And that's where the art comes in. And that's where the society and the growth and vitality, is a means to a different end. That's the warrior archetype. And even like the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna's given meditation to defeat his enemies, like they're not external enemies. At some point we have to go from pew pew, yeah, okay, we're protecting our kingdom. Oh, what are the real enemies? And then that's the container, what's being filled. And like, how often are you going to get in a jujitsu fight? Like, right. I do jujitsu, and I haven't been in a fight in fucking 20 years, except in the gym, and I'm not getting in one.
Yeah. And nor should you, because you have to go to that specific bar to where that's going to happen.
It's going to have alcohol involved, and I'm sober. I'm not getting in another fight, bro. And I have guns in my closet, and I know I'm not going to use my guns. But so yes, I have built the container and I'm defending the container, but my job now is to fill the container or hold space in the garden, right? The garden needs to happen.
Yeah.
We need to grow.
Yeah. Bring the warrior into the garden. And that's a point that I've made a lot recently, is that you can do all that protecting, but what are you protecting? Is there a culture there? Is there anything there to protect? And I think a lot of these guys are like, we must defend this thing. I'm like, I see it a lot in relationship to Western civilization. And, they're talking about culture that's been stopped being made like 50, 60, 100 years ago. Like, you need to have a living culture to protect. Creating that culture is part of the cycle of that. You have to have a living, vibrant culture to actually have something to protect, because otherwise you're just protecting people and stuff. If you don't have when you think about, the ancient Greeks or the Romans or whatever, all societies really, they have their whole culture, and that's, their way of life, their language, their art, their mythology, everything. Our way of seeing the world is what we're protecting. This whole, extent of it. They don't want Greece to die, not just because, the columns would fall down. You're protecting something bigger than that.
Yeah. Really, such a vital conversation. And I know we're going to start wrapping it up, but where can people find out more about you? We're definitely going to have you back on, and we're going to lots to talk about, lots of conversations. Cool. But if somebody's hearing about you for the first time or engaging with you, where can they go to find out more about your books and content and things that you do?
Well, I'm on my Instagram a lot. At Start the World is my Instagram handle. And then I have a website, is jack-donovan.com. My books are on Amazon and Audible and so forth. And I started Twitter recently to see if that was going to work. And that's PH2T3R, because Jack Donovan was taken. I got into the game too late. That's kind of the Proto-Indo-European pronunciation of father is basically what I've used. So that's my links.
And we always end with a call to action. So Philip, is there something strong that's coming up, or even you, Jack, that we want people listening to go take action on, like from this call? Is there something specific that comes up?
Yeah, something about creativity. That was the big one. That you're sort of the muse, right? The masculine muse. There's not a lot of, jacked jujitsu shooter dudes running around making, AI art and writing books and all that shit. So give us a challenge, man.
Yeah. Well, that's one. What I like about the AI, I use Midjourney. And if you don't know anything about art and you don't make art, you're not someone who makes art. The cool thing about AI art, and we could talk about how it's evil, probably is, but the cool thing about it is that you're just using words. So anyone can make something from it. So you can what would I make? And actually plug in words, and you can play with it. And so, I think a good action would be to try something like that, because all of a sudden you're making art. I have the guys who are making mythological art with me right now. 2 of them are musicians. They're not like visual artists. but they're coming up with neat stuff because they're just like, here are the ideas in my head and trying to get them to come out. That's one way. Or like I said, I think go out. If you are more of the tactical guy and you've been focused on that, or you just haven't interacted with culture a lot, go try some things and find what you actually like. Because there's a few thousand years of human culture out there, and I feel like there's something for you.
Yeah. So go to a museum, go look at art, go look at literature, go to the bookstore and buy, magazines that are very visual. Go look at history. Like go get in the game and look at art from that perspective and start to notice what inspires you, or actually start to engage with something. So really want to thank you. Oh, go ahead, Philip. Something else?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, from a resiliency standpoint, it's an incredibly important psychological thing to be able to express. So for, if you're a vet first responder who's struggling with some resiliency issues, the ability to express is one of the pillars of classic resiliency. So do it for yourself, do it for your family.
Hey, it's been just a pleasure having you on, Jack. Thanks for joining us today. And for all of those that are listening, stay battle tested.